recording now.
Okay, I'm not gonna wait till we get to Hartwell Road. Gee, you know what would be cool if that was paved?
Yeah, we had to bring that up at town meeting.
Yeah, it's something different.
So, Mike, how long have you been in Bedford? When did you move here?
1973, and came from Vermont. One of the reasons we stopped here was because it's relatively easy to get back to Vermont in case we changed our mind.
Okay.
So, after 49 years, I guess we're here to stay.
What brought you to Bedford?
I was the editor of the alumni magazine at Tufts University, and my wife said I'm not living in Somerville.
Well, Somerville's a hot place to go.
It is now. That last
Not bad.
50 years ago, it was a little different.
We used to call it Slummerville.
I know. So we're turning down Hartwell Road off Concord Road. This is one of the most interesting streets in Bedford for a short stretch because so much happens in such a short range. Right away, we cross over what they call the reformatory branch of the old B&M Railroad, which is now a hard-packed dirt trail that goes all the way to the National Park in Concord Center.
And did it go to the reformatory?
At one point in the 19th century, yeah, went all the way to what they call the reformatory in West Concord. The railroad did. And then a few hundred feet down the road on the left is Chip-In Farm, which is just a local landmark. It's it's almost like a theme park, what they've done to it with the animals and the general store and just the friendly nature of it all. Just can't help but smile when you go in there.
Have you tried the goat yoga there yet?
No, that's not on my list, but I like watching it. Then on the right you have a townhouse complex of 75 townhouses that were actually built on the old parking lot of the Raytheon Missile Systems Division, and everybody said nobody will want to buy a townhouse there, and of course they're in great demand, which kind of proves that people will live anywhere. It's very close to the runway of Hanscom Field.
Yeah, the backyards are basically the runway.
But the people are happy. Then on the left is the Edge Sports Center with the 2 hockey rinks, and it's also a magnet for people from all over New England who skate. And again, there's some entrepreneurs built this from scratch. Next to it are some turf fields on land that they lease from the Mass Port Authority. And then across the street from there on the right is the best view of the Hanscom Airport from within the town. And in an area that's slated for some airfield development, we're watching that very carefully. A little bit farther up is the famous Navy hangar, probably the most hideous looking structure within the town limits. It was bought on auction 3 years ago from the federal government by an investor who hasn't figured out what to do with it yet. He says he just wants to use it to store aircraft. Right now he's waiting to get permission to use the runway from the FAA. He paid $9 million for it.
Now, how did it get its name, the Navy hangar on an Air Force base?
Well, it was part of a research project that the Navy was involved with, concentrated on the left side of Hartwell Road, which is about 46 acres of Navy weapons research that Raytheon was doing as a contractor. And that's now all open space with serious underground contamination.
I don't know if you were familiar with the video game Doom, but every time I see that building, it looks like it was a scene from some horror movie.
Yeah, it's been
coming.
abandoned for 20 years, and there are several other buildings in the back. When I was on the Board of Selectmen, we set up a special committee to plan something for that land so that when they do divest it, Bedford will be ready with a proposal. And the consensus was that's a great place for a solar farm.
Okay.
So you can see that Hartwell Road itself just packs so much. Every one of those could be a stop. You know, you could spend a couple hours at Chip-In Farms just watching the goats.
Which I have done.
And everybody, just the baby goats make everybody happy. Then this is the residential part of Hartwell Road. that culminates on the corner of South Road, where you have the oldest piece of local conservation land, the town forest, on the right, well over 100 years old as a town forest. We're going to head south. One of the things I love about Bedford is just an incredible diversity of the neighborhoods, of the housing stock, the inventory, yet it's so centralized because of its shape and the configuration of the streets that while it certainly has well-defined neighborhoods, they all kind of gravitate together because all of our institutions are in the center of town, and the streets kind of fan out from there like the spokes of a wheel. So now we're going to head dead south on South Road to the southern extremity of Bedford, which used to be the main gate into a Hanscom Field when it first opened.
Okay. And Hanscom opened
1942, I think, during the war, and General Patton visited Bedford. He gave a speech on the steps of the Old Town Hall, and then his motorcade drove down here to the main gate. There are people here who witnessed that, who told me about it. Now we're headed for a neighborhood that's informally known as Bedford Gardens. It's several streets of tightly packed duplexes that were built in 1953 by a private developer to accommodate the rapidly increasing population at Hanscom Field that military housing couldn't accommodate. And it has the feel of military housing. It's on both sides of Summer Street and the east side of South Road. Today, a lot of those have become condominiums, and a few of them have been expanded, but the lots are small, and it's very dense housing. A lot of people prefer that. I've known people who have lived there for 35, 40 years, and they're really happy to live there.
Yeah, they're mostly duplexes, right?
They're all there. You know, anything that's not a duplex, it's because it would have been demolished. They were built as duplexes, and they're small, 2 bedrooms mostly, unfinished basement, and really different than the character not only of the rest of Bedford, but from almost all the other nearby communities.
And when do the duplexes date back to?
They built them over a 2-year period starting in 1953, and it's pretty much one single builder.
Yeah, they all pretty much look alike. So.
Yeah, they do, and they're very close together, and many people started out here because it provided a rental opportunity to live in the town. They're all rentals back in those days, and then people who liked it here could find a place to buy. Speaking from experience there, now the development on the right is totally different with single family, but that's because up until a few years ago that was all open space. It was an antenna range that was run by MIT.
Okay.
We're going to the very end of the street because from here it becomes Massport property, but I wanted to take a little detour onto Massport property to show you something that's called the FAM Camp.
Okay. I've never been to the FAM Camp.
Really? It's
I've heard of it, but I've never actually been here.
So this is the last house in Bedford, and Patterson's house. There's a little turnaround. Now you can see the full extent of the Hanscom runway, and it's a good place to watch the fireworks that they have if they do it on the 4th of July at the Air Force Base. On the right, you see a big RV park for active and retired military, and that's what they call the FAM Camp.
Huh.
And it seems to be, when I happen to be driving around here, I see RVs here all times of the year. I think a lot of people are like based here, and then they go off on side trips or wherever. But there's this is Massport property that's leased by the Air Force, and people come and they stay.
There's a lot of campers here for.
Yeah, it really is. It's something that most people in Bedford don't know about. You know, there's a guy with his dog. This is the south end of the town forest that we mentioned before. Yeah, this is slated to be closed in a few years for some reason. And when it is, I've been advocating that the land be sold to Bedford for $1 rather than kept by Massport. This would be a really nice resource for the south end of town and all of that dense housing that we just mentioned, to be able to come down here for something this spacious.
What's to our right?
So that, if you keep following that road, it dead ends at some secure facilities that are Air Force facilities. There's a nice view of the runway from here, and Hanscom Field being the second busiest airport in New England. Most people just kind of get used to it. A few people just can't believe that they live this close to an airport. They keep waiting for it to go away.
Right. Well, it's funny. Hanscom is always, it's sort of the sweet spot where it is right now, where it's not too busy, but it seems that there's equal opposition to either expanding it or reducing it. Or
Yeah, and there's no question that it benefits there's an economic engine there, and it's not a feeder airport for Logan. It has its own mission. We're not going to see passenger service here or major commercial service, but there's plenty of people that are very diligent about making sure that it stays within its mission. I just thought I'd take a little trip through the Bedford Gardens area, onto Linfield Street, which actually is small ranch houses, and then over to Fayette Road, which has both single family and the Bedford Gardens duplexes.
How did it get named Bedford Gardens?
You know, I haven't been. It took me a long time just to find out what year they were built, and they were just I think it's just a promotional thing.
Okay.
To make it
Shady
sound more
acres.
attractive. Nowadays, everything is farms. All these developments are fun. I used to spend my summers on a dairy farm. There's parts of that lifestyle that aren't really that bucolic, and yet there's something charming about. Well, just, notwithstanding Bedford Farms as an ice cream stand, there's the nicest townhouse development is Huckins Farm, and
Right.
I've been all over Huckins Farm, and I haven't seen any manure anywhere near there. But that's a ubiquitous product of a farm.
Right.
Maybe it's just an oversight.
So you said you worked on a dairy farm?
Well, my
You grew up-
grandparents had a big dairy operation in central New York, and I spent the first 15 summers of my life working there.
Okay.
They got me started as soon as I could walk. But it was really a great education about the natural world. And I still go back there. I bring my grandchildren to see it. Of course, there's no dairy industry there anymore. It's just like abandoned. But it's all very real to me. So now we're back on Fayette Road, becomes Genetti Street at some point.
These are back to the duplex.
And we're back to the Bedford Gardens duplexes. And now we're going to turn right on Summer Street, very close to the Lexington line. This is a feeder street. This connects Bedford Center and the Lincoln Labs area. There's very heavy commuter traffic goes through here every day, back and forth into Lexington. Lexington is right there on the horizon, but we're going to turn left onto Wiggins Avenue. Wiggins Avenue was built about 40 years ago to expand the town's commercial base, and it worked. And this is part of our biotechnology community and pharmaceuticals and biomedical. And there's not huge operations. There's some sizable employers here. There's also a lot of smaller startups, including some in gene therapy and cutting edge stuff like that. That I think is remarkable to have them here. And one of the things I love is to publicize some of that. People who live here, they should know who's helping pay their taxes.
Right. It was a real concerted effort to attract biotech here, right?
And it's still going on because that's where certainly the future is. You can see what's happened to office buildings as a result of the pandemic. All of a sudden, people just don't want to work in office buildings so much anymore. But Bedford's inventory of office buildings are being converted to labs, and they're in great demand. So this this was never intended to be a residential street, and in fact, at one time it was supposed to bypass the entire center of town and head out toward Concord on the abandoned railroad bed. That's never been seriously considered for decades. It was after Hanscom, but the traffic was still pretty bad in Bedford. And when the railroad pulled out, somebody said we can extend Wiggins Avenue right down the railroad line, and the town never thought it was worth that expenditure.
When did the railroad pull out?
The last train was January of 1977. I'll never forget it. There was a big blizzard, 2.5 feet of snow, and the train car was stuck here, and couldn't move for a week. And then the B&M Railroad, I think it was before the MBTA owned it, just said, "Forget it, nobody cares. We're not gonna do this anymore." They just ran once a day to Boston through Lexington and Arlington. That's North Station.
Huh.
It was just once. It only had one trip a day, so it didn't hurt that many people. So now we're emptying back out onto Ashby Road from Wiggins Avenue, and again, this gives you an idea of the variety of housing inventory in Bedford. Some of the smallest single-family homes on the left and right, and then you can see where some people have expanded them, but still the lots are tiny. And I'm saying that a diverse housing inventory is so important for the character of a community. The last thing you want to be is a gated community. And I don't mean literally, but just by the virtue of housing stock that's too expensive for many people to afford. All the houses are too expensive. That goes without saying. That's a market. Those are market forces. But what we have, even in that context, is a wide range. And in a few minutes, we'll be at the other end of the range.
Right.
I'm trying to stay out of the center of town because everybody knows the center of town. If you've been stuck in traffic at the worst times, you know it better than you want to.
Right.
Sometimes you know like every tree. But I'm trying to make this trip about the perimeter. And along that perimeter, you have innumerable attractions and side trips, and that for many people wouldn't be that interesting. For me, they've provided a lot of fascination for almost half a century.
Okay. Now, this tour that we're doing, how many of these have you done? Who are your usual?
I started doing this when I was on the school committee in almost 20 years ago, and I realized that there was always a number of new personnel coming into the schools, teachers and other staff, and I said to the superintendent of schools at the time, Joe Buckley, if you can get a school bus, I'll do a narration, and that way the teachers can get a feel for the character of the town and for where the kids live. And in those days, we were even, I think, went out to Hanscom Field, and then for some reason we stopped doing it with the school bus. But I continued to do it as I was stayed in town government. I continued to do this as a command performance for new department heads and the town manager and the finance director and the new superintendent of schools and the new head of Bedford TV. I didn't offer to take the police chief around town. I figured the police had their own tour that probably has things on there that I don't know about.
Right.
So to get back to the perimeter, Shawshene Road, which abuts the main active cemetery on the east, is also another favorite of commuters as it connects Hanscom, the main entrance to Hanscom, with the nearest Route 3 interchange, assuming that you bypass 128. And on the right is, behind these houses is going to be an expanded cemetery. The plan is for another 1,800 plots, which should take care of us for many more years. Some inner suburbs are running out of burial space, and they're kind of freaking out. Although there was a story, I think, in today's Washington Post about how cremations are now comprise over 50% in the country. happening so much around here. We're so traditional. Now, this is a highlight on the right, the old waterworks that is visible on both sides, although you never know it. On the left are the well fields, which have been closed because of the suspicion of PFAS chemicals inside. And on the right is the building that used to house the waterworks, because behind us on this trail that unfortunately is blocked, so I can't drive up there. But right up here, about a 5-minute walk away, is the beautiful bucolic old reservoir. And if you're just looking for a place to have a nice lunch for a break,
it is beautiful. I often walk my dog up there, and it is sort of this Shangri-La.
Yeah, you think you're in New Hampshire, and there's trails, and I think you can walk into Lexington if you walk long enough. But it's just a little gem, and all connected to the original water supply. Now we get all of our water from the Western Mass, which is some of the best water in the world. At one time, Bedford supplied all of its own water, and then in 1978, organic chemicals were discovered in the main source of the water, and it's been closed ever since. That's off Middlesex Turnpike. So, but we're lucky to be part of a metropolitan system. And now we're headed east on Page Road as we stay to the perimeter and headed up Page Hill toward the what they call Crestview Acres, another developer's name for housing. At least it's not a farm. Page Road was the road that was taken on April 19th, 1775 by a messenger from Lexington to alert the Bedford Minutemen about the arrival of the British forces. And so this was Page Road, named after Nathaniel Page, one of the original Minutemen, and the keeper of the Bedford flag, and his family. His house is still standing in back of us. But it's
the one in the corner that we just passed?
No, it's actually farther back toward the Wedgwood Club.
Okay. Is that the one that there was this old house?
Yep,
special?
that's the one.
That's
I was going to mention that.
Okay.
I bet you could probably watch that on YouTube or something. So we're going to turn up this street called Crestview, which takes us into an enclave of higher-end residential houses. And some of it's very nice. But one of the things that's interesting is we don't have very many celebrities here. We never have. It's a great community, and there's lovely homes, and if you have a lot of wealth, there's probably a home that you can afford. But celebrities don't gravitate here, which is great. Let's just keep that low profile. Of course, nowadays, people's definition of celebrities change, so maybe there are celebrities here that I just don't know about. But Bedford historically has been a place where people in public view and government go to get some rest. We've had several town managers from area towns live here. Various high school principals. Principal of Arlington High School lived here. Principal of Stoneham High School. Town manager of Sudbury was a Bedford resident. I think it's kind of cool that we're kind of a refuge for people who are in such public demand, and they say, "Well, I'm gonna go home, and nobody will find me here because I live in Bedford." But this street now is Robinson Drive, and it's already.
There.
I think these houses are going on 20 years old. It's pretty much built up.
We just passed a 10-foot tall chicken.
Yeah, I mean that must be a remnant of, I don't know. I mean people's public art.
Right.
Adam Schwartz and his wife Susan Schwartz, they have a ketchup on.
Right. What's the story with the ketchup?
I know. He told me once, and I've put it out of my mind. No, it really wasn't that exciting. Whatever the reason was, I was kind of disappointed. You can see the transition on this Overlook Drive, which at one time was a dead end, And now all of a sudden you have almost a California-style flat-roofed real estate here.
Yeah, it has 60s written all over it.
Completely different style of development. When Crestview Acres was developed, Robinson, Overlook and Robinson were extended. But it's still a desirable area, and so the contours of the land are so different than our West Bedford neighborhood, our Flatlands neighborhood. And I think it's nice to have these contours, give you some perspective. When you see a street that says Overlook and there really is an overlook, that's very encouraging, because we have another street called Hill Road, and I've been trying for 50 years to find the hills. I finally realized it must have been somebody whose name was Hill.
That's always an option.
So now I'm heading for the East Bedford Industrial District. There's no direct route from here. We have to take a few more turns around this residential area. We're now on Robinson Drive again. And you see there's building going on, continuing to go on here, whether it's on an empty lot. People will sometimes find an empty lot or a tear down. But it's not an epidemic. There's still hundreds and hundreds of original homes that were built in the 50s and 60s.
Right. There do seem to be more tear down, but you're right, there are still.
And there are some limits on it that they found, some statutory limits on tear downs that has lessened the demand. We're going to turn left here onto Hume Road, but if you keep going straight, you get to the lovely little Mill Pond Park that's very close to Route 3, but again, it's bucolic, and the Vine Brook flows out of Lexington Center and under 128 and through Burlington and comes out right near here into the Shawshene River. The Mill Pond was a dream of Selectman Gordon Feltman, who lived nearby, and it was, like many things that I've found in the town over the years, it's a public project that came from citizens' initiatives, that wasn't handed down by government, but that was presented to government by citizens saying, we want to do this and we want you to work with us to make it happen. And that's just one example. That it's a small natural area in the shadow of a highway that nevertheless attracts all kinds of wildlife and people's recreation.
Now, when did they redo that?
That was done over a period of about 9 years, and I think we dedicated it around 10 years ago.
Okay.
And it's here in the eastern extreme of the residential area.
You're right under Route 3 overpass.
Yeah, it is, and you'll see it from the right here. Now that we're on Route 62, heading east toward Burlington, and a trip through the industrial area.
And this goes to what they call the landlocked?
Well, the landlocked is farther down east on Route 3, and it's west of Route 3 and east of Lexington.
Okay.
So you can access that through trails that go through that Mill Pond Park,
Okay.
which is here on the right. I don't know if you can
And they
see it.
we just redid the dam, is that correct?
Yep, and that was part of it. It's made a big difference too in how attractive it is. Now that we're under Route 3 and on the east part of Bedford under Route 3, it's interesting to note how well this worked out, that millions and millions of dollars worth of taxable real estate is here, all in industrial and commercial, and there's virtually no houses. None of this really affects people's lives. You can live your entire life in Bedford and never have any reason to come down here. Yet, almost every one of your large taxpayers are here. The MITRE Corporation on the left is not one of them. MITRE is tax exempt, but they still give the town over $1 million a year in a payment in lieu of taxes. So it's great to have neighbors like that.
And they're tax exempt because
they basically do all their work for the federal government. It's basically an extension of the federal government.
Okay.
They used to be the town's largest taxpayer. So we're going to go down north on Middlesex Turnpike, which actually goes up from Arlington all the way to Billerica. But the Bedford section is one of the two main arteries in this corridor of commercial industrial development. The other one is Crosby Drive. But I wanted to do Middlesex Turnpike because there's some residential complexes on here as well, which is something that nobody expected. And then the culture changed and there was a demand for it. We're actually in the town of Burlington now briefly. And then we'll cross back over into Bedford as we get close to what used to be our Radisson Hotel. I guess it was it a Radisson when it closed? It closed a few weeks ago.
Right.
It was like Doubletree.
At one point.
It's been several iterations, but so much of its success was based on the business economy that the virus basically destroyed them, and they've been such a great corporate citizen. It was a real setback.
Yeah.
But what you're going to see there now, I think, is more biomedical, more laboratory space, and probably a bigger increase in the taxable value of the property. So that's a consolation prize. But it's not a good time for hotels who base their trade on conferences and other business meetings. The one on the right is actually in Billerica, because the town line is right here.
Okay.
Not sure how long they'll hold out. Now on the left, past the hotel, you have this apartment complex, which really nobody envisioned, and now you have like 150 apartment units here. And then up by the lights farther up on the other side, you have another 100 or so.
Right.
So there's a whole residential community here now that we thought would end up being workforce housing, but there's some families that live here too because they really want to be part of the Bedford Public Schools.
Uh-huh. Now this one on the right is
That's what they call Taylor Pond.
Okay, that's in Bedford also?
That's also Bedford.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the corner of Plank Street, which feeds into Billerica. But right now we're in Bedford, and there's even another smaller residential complex farther up. Now, one of the things that this street is different than the rest of the town is it's a north-south axis and doesn't intersect with the center of Bedford. It's not one of the spokes. So people who live here don't have a natural gravitational connection to the center of town. And I think some of the people that live here might not even realize they live in Bedford.
Right.
And it's easier to shop and do everything else you have to do in Burlington or Billerica, just up and down this street. And town government tries to do some outreach here, and we're getting to have some success. A few of the key volunteers that we have in town government live in these units, and we hope that it's a little bit of a schlep to get to town hall from here, but we hope it's worth the trip for them.
Yeah, it's all on the east side of Route 3, which, or I guess it's the north side of Route 3.
Well, and it's
quite the demarcation.
It never, there's no single family housing here, and nobody really anticipated those complexes, but the demand for workforce housing engendered that construction. People wanted to live near their place of work.
And they're all rentals, or are they condos?
Yeah, they're all, there's some condos up here on Albion Road that I want to take a look at because they're expanding that. Started out with 22 units, I think it's going up to 80. Here's where the old wells used to be at the Shawshene River, that little building there. It's been closed since 1978.
Okay.
And then on the right you have the Woburn Sportsmen's Association, which is a firing range, which predated all of this development. And on the left is the Oak Park commercial area, which used to be a Boy Scout camp called Camp Oak, which was quite remote before Route 3 came along.
And this gun club, is that in Bedford also?
That's in Bedford and Billerica.
Okay.
It fronts in Bedford and goes back. Very valuable land, as you can imagine. And then this light is at the Bedford Woods campus, which is the site of a major new commercial development of cutting-edge gene therapy company. It's going to be another year before they're able to outfit the building for their laboratory work, but it's been framed. And then you have the residential compound on the right here.
Okay. We should point out that Middlesex Turnpike is still under construction.
Yeah, Middlesex Turnpike has been under construction for 20 years, and from the Burlington line into Billerica, which is a state finance project designed to increase commercial development. Now we're crossing into Billerica, just briefly, and you can see on the left that there's something different. It's a massive apartment complex that could not be built in Bedford because we just don't have the zoning for something of that magnitude. And whenever I do this tour and people see that, it takes their breath away because it's so different from everything else that they've seen on the landscape. I don't know how many units it is. It just seems to go on forever, but I'm sure that it'll be quite well subscribed.
It's right across the street from the 99.
Yeah, and then this is the light at the corner of Lexington Road in Billerica. We're going to turn left, and it becomes Old Billerica Road in Bedford, just a few hundred feet from here. The people who live on Old Billerica Road are concerned about the impact of this complex on traffic. Some of these people, no doubt, will be traveling to work from here. I don't know if it'll be noticeable, but there's not much we can do. There's a definite need for housing, and a lot of it's being built in Billerica. The population of Billerica is up around 45,000 now, which makes it bigger than Fitchburg and Marlborough and a lot of places that you could identify with as cities. Now we're back in Bedford, and you can sense it's different.
The potholes have changed.
Well, yeah, this is the only part of Bedford where there's single-family housing east of Route 3, but we're quite a ways from the commercial part of it, so it's not a liability. And then we cross over the highway here and back.
I remember my daughter had a friend that lived over here, and it was always sort of like, oh, we have to take her home.
Yeah, it's far. I mean,
pack a lunch.
It's far, but it's still, the
Right.
shape of Bedford is not. There's some towns like Bellingham that's like 9 miles long, and we're lucky that nothing's too far from anything else here. It's sort of like a circle. So I'm going to go through a couple of residential streets on my way to the attractions of Springs Road. But I do want to mention they're not going to go that far. But farther down Old Billerica Road is the Carlton Willard Village, the first multi-level healthcare community in the state. 5 different levels, from independent living to nursing home. And it's in tremendous demand.
When did that open? Do you remember?
I'm trying to remember, the 90s, I think. Maybe before that. So I'm turning right onto Temple Terrace, which I've been on this street hundreds of times and I've yet to find the temple. But someday I'm going to do more research on the origin of some of these names, because I think some of them might surprise me. But this is another. A lot of Bedford is old country roads that are bracketed by different subdivisions, and so you had to kind of find the connectors. So here's a little connector street, Alcott Street, that connects the Old Billerica Road area to the Springs Road area. Most of Alcott Street is not buildable. There's wetlands here, and to the best of my knowledge, the Alcott family was never in this part of Bedford. But Louisa May Alcott used to skate at what is now Great Meadows Wildlife Refuge. I assume that was in the winter. Alcott Street comes out here on Gould Road, and Gould Road is a U-shaped street. I'm gonna come out on the northern part of the U, just because I wanted to take a look at Fawn Lake. This part of Bedford has lots of conservation land, hundreds of acres really of undeveloped land, much of which belongs to the state as part of the Middlesex Community College campus to the right and north of here. I think these houses back up on their land.
Okay.
I'm not going to go up there because it's a little bit of a side trip, but it's a lot of people in Bedford, I'm sure, haven't seen that campus, because here it is at the north end of town. But it's really quite a nice campus. It's not being used that much now. There's still a lot of remote learning going on there. The campus is on the site of what used to be a Marist preparatory seminary for priests.
Okay.
That's why you hear old timers still call it the Marist. But before that, it was a farm, like almost everything else around here. Now I'm turning left on Springs Road and heading south. And I really wanted to be on this street so I could go through the VA compound, the Veterans Hospital. Look what the beavers did there.
Yeah, there are lots of beavers up here.
Yeah, they've had to relocate some of them because some of the damage they've done to the outflow from Fawn Lake, which is on the right. And really we'll go by there later on Sweetwater Ave. It's really one of the more bucolic places we have. And again, it's a hidden gem. I think a lot of people don't come up here. They don't know about it. You can see how this dam has been rebuilt.
That was just a couple of years ago. Right?
Yeah, they did a great job. Here's where the beavers used to do terrible damage here, but it's a little harder for them now.
And this was again one of those citizen initiated projects, right?
And it's so many of them are. We'll pass the boardwalk later, but this is town government many times knows about things that need to be done, but it's when you get a neighborhood or a group of people as advocates, it's much easier. Then you have people who do a lot of research. So now we're entering the compound of the VA hospital, which opened in 1928. I should say that this huge stretch of asphalt on the right is actually owned by the college, and they're finalizing plans to fix it up and put green space in here and diminish the amount of pavement, which is going to be a great blessing. Then beyond this is this 186-acre compound that has been officially declared that it should be closed by the Veterans Affairs Department because of its aging infrastructure and lack of technological opportunities. But nobody knows when it'll happen or where it'll be replaced. So right now it's just on paper. But for people who haven't been up here, it's really something to see. It's almost like going back in time. When you look at the architecture on the left, you have a whole row of what used to be doctors' houses. I don't know what they use them for now. At its peak, there were 1,800 patients here in what was a psychiatric hospital. Now basically the inpatients are in a nursing home and in rehab.
And when was the peak? It was
right after World War II,
okay.
and for several years after that. And I came to Bedford in '73. It was already, leaning more toward outpatient, but still there were inpatients who were visible in the community all the time, walking around. And in a way, I think it made Bedford a more tolerant place when psychiatric patients from the VA were in plain view on the street, in the stores, in government buildings, wandering around, and people would help them and people would reach out to them, and they were part of Bedford's landscape. And it was something that, there was one guy who had a motorized wheelchair, and he'd ride down the narrow gauge trail and he'd fall over, and people would come and rescue him and pick him up. Pretty soon everybody knew the guy. He had a nickname. So anyway, those days are long gone. It's now almost all outpatient and geriatric research going on here.
What was his nickname?
They call him Red Rider.
Red Rider.
He had a flag, a red flag on there, and a red wheelchair. His real name was Jim Townsend. His legs had been amputated at the knee, and he was very independent. And he'd topple over, and then he'd wait for somebody to help him. After a while, he got a little walkie-talkie, and he had a whole network of helpers. Now we've just left the VA compound, and I'm going to turn right on Pine Hill Road to talk a little bit about the old, what they called the Coast Guard housing. It was actually Army housing for troops that were out at Fort Devens and also at the Bedford missile site, which I'll talk about later. And then some Coast Guard personnel were stationed here. And then it was abandoned because all the Coast Guard folks found better housing in new development at Hanscom Field. And the town was able to serve as the middleman and turn the land over to a private developer. There were 16 original houses, and then he added another 15 or so, and now you have this little community here.
It is the rail trail.
Right next to the narrow gauge rail trail, which goes to the Billerica line, from Loomis Street. And it's not really a rail trail, it's a bike path, hard pack. So just, I don't know if you ever drove through here, just take a quick drive through here. I don't know what the name of this street is. One of these streets is Michelson and one is Lewis Road. But this is, of course, totally different from...
Yeah, they're very...
But it was intended this way.
Yeah.
There are people who want this kind of housing, people who are downsizing, people who just like the smaller, more intimate type of neighborhood feel. And there are retirees here, there are there are young families, and it turned out to be a lot more expensive than we hoped it would be because of what the market's done.
Yeah, but it really does have a very different feel from the rest of it.
Yeah, it's Pine Hill Crossing, they call it. And I think again, it was something that had tremendous citizen input. The town agencies sponsored public sessions where people could come up with ideas and then try to reach consensus on the kind of development that they would like to see. And I think that's the process that needs to start happening now to talk about the future of the VA hospital. Whether it closes in 10 years or 50 years, there should be a public process in which people who, and we're all affected by this,
right,
because of the size of that infrastructure, it could alter the whole character of the town. Just imagine if all that was turned to housing. And all of a sudden you would have an influx of really a couple of thousand people. There's no way of avoiding the impact that would have. I'm going to take a right and take a couple of residential streets to work my way over to Fawn Lake. This is Dana Road. Did I ever tell you I know every street in Bedford?
I'm believing that now.
Yeah, I mean, I just need to know why. I need to know why is this Dana Road. And then this leads on to Wildwood Drive, which has been the home of so many distinct... I know where everybody used to live. I don't know as many people now as I'd like to.
Well, who used to live here then?
I can tell you who used to live in all these houses. And it's... well, I should say the reason for that is that for 6 years I was the editor of the Bedford Minuteman newspaper, and which, since it was basically a one-person operation, I was able to relate to almost everybody who had needed anything that was in the paper from all different constituencies.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about your background. You came from Vermont.
I came from Vermont, wanted to be a big-time reporter, and I started out as the editor of the Bedford Minuteman. And then I realized this is what I really want to do, work at the community level in newspapers. The closest I got to big-time journalism was 5 years as Metro editor of the Lowell Sun. But again, being Metro editor, my focus was on the suburban and exurban communities around Lowell, including Bedford.
Okay.
And then in 1987, I had a complete change in career and became an administrator in the non-academic side of the Orthodox Jewish school in Brookline, the Maimonides School, where I still work part-time. But I never stopped writing. I kept covering sports and meetings. And for 11 years, I did a weekly column in the Bedford Minuteman of general interest, beginning in 1996. I wrote almost 600 of those, and only stopped when I went on the Board of Selectmen just to avoid a conflict of interest.
Okay.
So that when I got a chance to write for the Bedford Citizen, it was, wow, this is like a gift from above to be able to keep doing this. I'm going to take a ride on Dutton Lane, which connects to Hayden Lane, which was the home of one of our most renowned residents. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us, but the Heisman Trophy winner, Joe Bellino, lived up here. And people would see him. Sometimes he'd come to a high school game just to watch it by himself, and I'd say, see that guy there? That guy who's like 6 feet, 180 pounds? He won the Heisman Trophy in 1960. People thought I was making it up.
Who did he play for?
He played for Navy.
Okay.
And then he had to do 5 years of military service, and then he came back and played for the Patriots for a couple of years. But he grew up in Winchester, but he lived in Bedford, and he was very low profile and a lovely guy. His family lived here, and one of his kids went to Naval Academy. But that's who we are. You know, if you keep your low profile, and we'll, he was on the Recreation Commission. So this comes out at Sweetwater Avenue, and they call it Sweetwater Avenue because it leads up to what used to be the Bedford Springs resort back from the 19th century. There was a family named Hayden, not related to the Lexington Haydens, which was a completely separate Hayden family. This Hayden family thought there was magic in these waters here at Bedford Springs. They built a hotel and a railroad line that ended here because Mr. Hayden was in the legislature and he had that kind of influence. And then they bottle the water and sell it for all of its magical properties, and it was called Bedford Springs. And here's the lake was a man-made lake. There were springs there, and it's spring-fed, but it's really a nice spot. And I was told by Ellen Hayden, was the last descendant that I knew from the family, that the lake was hundreds of feet deep, but either she didn't know or she was kidding me because we recently had to dredge it.
Right.
And
It's quite the dredge, 100-foot dredge.
But it really worked out great, and
yeah,
you know, if you stay here for an extended period of time, I think you'll see eagles and whatever you want. It's and again, look at it. There's nobody here. It's one of these little pockets of natural life that you can escape to.
And these condos on the left, is this the
that was
hotel?
that was the bottling plant. The hotel's gone, but this has been reconverted from what they had as the bottling plant. And then next to that, this little carriage house was that was, I think, part of the hotel complex. But
Is that still the nature school?
at one time it was a nature school. I think it might be a private residence now. At one time, our town administrator, Dick Brown, lived in there. He was a friend of Mrs. Hayden. It looks like it might be a residence.
Yeah, there's no signage. So.
And of course, this behind here, you have other trails that go to a beautiful couple of ponds deep in the woods that were called the Bueller Ponds. They were a part of the Bueller estate. But
You know what the Buellers?
the Bueller, not Ferris Bueller, but I can't help but think of him when I mention that now.
Bueller.
But there was an aristocracy in Bedford back in the 19th century, the early 20th century. The Bueller family, the Lindau family, the Pickman family, and it was all concentrated here on the north side of town. They had huge land holdings, and they sometimes try to outdo each other. And the Buellers had these exotic deer from the Far East, and he built a pagoda to go with that, and up near those ponds, and the kids would skate there, and they'd start calling the whole area the pagoda. Occasionally you'll still hear a reference to that, but it's really quite impressive when you think of how much they owned. And the Huckins Farm development, that was the Pickman family.
Okay.
So we're coming on North Road, Route 4. If I turn right, you end up in Billerica. I'm going to turn left and head back because I want to take Carlisle Road for a minute. North Road is, one of the town's arteries. And I wasn't going to spend too much time on any of the arteries. On the left is the Joe Blaine House Museum, which was purchased and given to the town by the Brown family in the mid-70s, and is now a town-owned farm museum. And on the right is the entrance to the Huckins Farm, one of the most desirable townhouse communities in Massachusetts. Well
Do you still have
deserved.
horses there?
Yeah, there's a working horse farm there.
Okay.
But Huckins Farm was one time when I was a reporter, I added up all the tax revenue from that 160-something townhouses, and if you combine it, that's the largest taxpayer in Bedford, more than any industry or commercial development. And the interesting thing is, they use almost no town services. There's almost no children there. They
Right.
they plow their own streets on those cul-de-sacs, and what are obviously fire and police, like everybody, but they it's such a gift to the taxpayers and also a wonderful destination for people. Not as people come from out of town. There's also a lot of Bedford retirees who end up there.
And when did they build the development?
It's been like probably about 30 years now.
Okay.
And I can remember it was all woods and trails going down to the Concord River. But if you go down there, it still has its same natural flavor. Now, right here on the right, Carter Way, I always mention this, those 8 little houses. When I have people come to visit me from out of town, they say, what do you want to show us? That's the first place I go.
Okay.
Because that is a Habitat for Humanity development that was built by volunteers on town-owned land that was given to Habitat. And now you have a community of 8 homes. Talk about diversity, and right next to that is a street with million-dollar homes. And we're all together in this, and through that kind of initiative, we create opportunities for a diverse population, which is so important to, I think, having a full richness of an experience today in contemporary life. I'm taking Route 225 just on a quick trip out to the Harvard Field Station, Carlisle Road. It's amazing to me. We just pulled out of Bedford Center, and in just moments, you're in the country. You got this little house here, and then you're in the woods. It's not going to be like that for long. This is going to be developed on the right.
Yeah, this is behind the North Side Market.
Yeah, it's a very interesting plan that he has. And then farther up, he's going to. This is going to be something that's going to transform for the better, I think, the demographics, because there's going to be lots of new housing opportunities here in an area now that's basically undeveloped. It's about 80 acres back there. Half of it are wet. And this street is pretty much what it was 100 years ago, except for a few houses that were torn down and rebuilt in a larger and more modern. And where we're heading for is Old Causeway Road, which is the site of a field station of the Harvard Department of Zoology. And if we're lucky, the emu that lives there will be out in his cage. I think they have him running on a treadmill. Seriously, I mean, they do that kind of research there. I know it sounds like a commercial for Liberty Mutual, but they originated it here. But the story about this is, back in the early 60s, major cities were protected by something called the Nike missile system. It was a defensive missile system, and they'd locate them in the suburbs, and one of the installations was in Bedford. Now, there were 2 pieces to this. The site we're going to is where the actual missile silos were. And then over near where you live is where the troops were stationed, and they had some barracks. There might have been 50 or 60 GIs that were there it was an army operation, and they would come here every day and staff this operation. And finally they realized that we don't need this anymore.
It was fairly short-lived, right?
Yeah, it was a Cold War thing, and they never used it anywhere. So this was abandoned, and this part of the installation was sold to Harvard. So Harvard's been out here, and Harvard owns a lot of land out here too, and also across the river in Concord. So Harvard,
this undeveloped land is owned by Harvard?
Yeah, a lot of this is, some of it is in the trust, like on the Concord side of the river, it's Harvard, plus some of it is a land trust. And Harvard owns quite a bit of the acreage around here, and some of the town is by the town of Bedford. None of it will be developed. And you can see that sign that says national. This is part of the Great Meadows Natural Wildlife Refuge, because it's floodplain. But nobody knows what's going on here, and I'm sure it's all highly ethical. But they used to be more active. There used to be kangaroos, and it's not like they have field trips or anything. But if you know somebody here, you can get a peek in. There's one guy who's worked here for many years, but I don't think he remembers me. But it's very small and unassuming, and there's trails that lead out of here to go out toward Huckins Farm. Concord Field Station. Let's see if
Not
there's...
very big, is it?
No, I mean, and you can see these buildings are just drab buildings. They look very much like they were when the missiles were here.
So this was the office for the missiles? Or?
This was where the missiles actually were. You know, but back in here they had the silos. I don't see any wildlife. Maybe it's vacation week and it's just something.
They're all at Disney World.
Yeah, I don't. There's not a lot going on here at the field station. But just so that people should know that this is part. This is part of our town. This is, some people who work here. A lot of people work in high tech or in biomed. Some people work in zoological research here. And but it doesn't look bad. The students. There are students that come out here. The zoology majors too.
Like the treadmill is mostly biomechanics they're studying, or?
I don't know. I mean, I should do a story about what they're doing now. I'm sure it changes over the years. But right now, I'm sorry to disappoint you. There's nothing. It's almost like they just took all of the animals on a field trip. But it's still
a little cold today. So
yeah. I was lucky when I drove the new town manager here. She was able to see that I wasn't making it up. But you got to be lucky. But the important thing is to know how that defense installation was repurposed into something that I think is, I don't know if any of the research has been groundbreaking, but it's certainly a curiosity and something that's not obvious. There's no sign.
Yeah, it's very nondescript back here.
So we have this on one end, we have Middlesex Community College at the other end, and for a town of this size, we have so much institutional life, whether it's the Air Force Base, Massport, the VA, Middlesex Community College, Harvard out here, and MITRE. It's for a town with 14,000, there's tremendous institutional variety, and all of it contributes to the richness of the local culture. And some of it in negative ways. The traffic, although a lot of the traffic is passed through, and yet I think that all of them, as a net impact, it's a positive contribution. And one of the biggest ones is to have the military dependents as students in our high school. That enriches the experience of everybody because of their sophistication, because of their experience. Some of those kids have lived all over the world.
How many kids from the military are in
this year? There are 95 in grades 9 through 12, and that's pretty much what it usually averages: 25 to 30 per grade, and it doesn't change much because the population of the base doesn't change much, and people are moved in and out. A lot of these kids are only here for 2 or 3 years, and then they move on. So there's a transitory feel to it, yet the administration of the Bedford schools works very hard to integrate military kids and to make sure they know how appreciated they are and how sensitive we are to their needs, moving from district to district. Kid comes here from Germany as a junior, and all of a sudden he's part of a class that's looking forward to graduation. And so you have to work hard to make sure that they feel part of that, and I think they do a good job with it.
Do they have liaisons?
That's a good point. There's a woman on the base who's the liaison for those families, and I actually just found out she actually also is responsible for military families scattered around other parts of Massachusetts at other installations like the Natick Research Lab or Barnes Air National Guard Base in Western Mass, and Otis down at the Cape. But her base is here, and this is where they put the fence back up. Now we're going to head out on Route 62, again bypassing the center of town, taking Route 62 to a couple of attractions on the what some of us call West Bedford. People say, where'd that name come from? Well, there used to be a railroad station where the bike trail crosses Route 62. And if you look on an old map, the railroad station was called West Bedford.
Okay.
Just like there was a Bedford Springs stop on the railroad. And now the usage is just basically historical because people don't connect with the railroad anymore. However, at one time, Bedford was a railroad town, and old timers have told me there were 6 round trips to Boston every day on the B&M Railroad passenger.
What,
Who wouldn't trade for that today? You know.
I know. I heard from someone that the original Red Line was supposed to come out to Hartwell Ave and Lexington.
Yeah, it was supposed to go to the Burlington Mall, but that was only a theoretical thing. It never really got even into the planning stage. There was so much resistance. So now you have the Minuteman Bikeway.
Okay.
It's like crack ceiling here. Now turning down Davis Road, I have to call attention to the boardwalk that the town, again, a neighborhood project that the town financed that gives safe access through the White Cedar Swamp. Davis Road could never have a sidewalk because it bisects the White Cedar Swamp, which is a protected wetland, and it's primeval. I just can't help thinking about this. When they put this boardwalk in, which goes for what, a quarter mile or more, and a couple years ago they put this boardwalk in on the left, some of the pilings to support it went down over 30 feet before they hit solid ground through the peat. When you think about it, and this whole area has never been developed or anything. It's a haven for wildlife, and it probably looks the same as it did when the Minutemen marched past here in 1775. Because nobody maintains it. There's no trails. There's trails by the wildlife. And all the time I take this for granted, but I think about it, I think the word that comes to mind is primeval.
Yeah.
And it's big, and it's both sides of the street.
It is. It's very spooky.
I know. And people say, oh, I saw a bobcat. I saw this animal or that animal. And I'd say, well, it had to come from the swamp because that's their territory. Anyway, that's sort of romanticized, but
Yeah.
I find it exciting.
There's all
too.
sorts of ghost stories that could be developed with the White Cedar Swamp.
Now, there used to be, this part of Bedford is much flatter than where we were before, and this used to be farm country. There's still some remnants of that here. The biggest farm was, I think they called it Elm Grove Farm, the Llewellyn farm family. The old farmhouse is on the right. It's been redone. But all of the houses that are built around here, I can remember when it was all farmland and orchards, and the barracks that I mentioned before for the Nike site were just off to the left.
And there's like I had a neighbor that had a concrete platform, I think, with a radar site.
That might have been part of it, and an extension of it, because there was a military installation in here, although it was primarily residential. But he had a herd of Angus cows that would periodically get loose, and that was, everybody got excited about cows walking down Davis Road. I miss those days sometimes. But here at the curve that we're coming up to is the Davis Farm, a historic horse farm, and I just finished an article about the plans to sell this, sadly, for residential development, but most of the open spaces will be preserved. The yellow house on the right was built in 1705, and the owner envisions a small development, just a few houses, and there's 14 acres here, most of which would be kept open. In fact, there's an original barn here that she wants to keep. But this is such a beautiful spot.
Yeah, it really is.
And what I hope happens is there's some arrangements for public access to the back end of the property, which goes down to the Concord River.
Well, there is that conservation land there with the
Yeah, this is conservation land here too. And there's also a conservation easement here, a visual easement that goes to the back. So we're not going to have the horses that we do now, but it's not going to be looking like Avalon Bay or some dense residential development. It's going to happen because she told me that the economic environment for horse farms is different now, and what she's been doing with hers at a small scale is just not feasible anymore. We should be grateful that we had it for all these years.
Right. Yeah, really, most people have no reason to come down here, wouldn't even know it's here.
I know, and that's true about a lot of the neighborhoods where we've been talking, that if you live in the town and you have your circle of activity, many of these far reaches of Bedford just aren't even in your mind. So I hope people will find an opportunity to explore their own town. I think, what do we say, tourists in your town.
Right.
And make some side trips that I've only referenced and not even traveled to.
Now, you told a story about the army barracks and the farmer that co-opted them.
Yeah. When they closed the Nike site and they pulled the troops out of those barracks, the property reverted to the farmer. But he decided to advertise that they were apartments without bothering to tell the town he was doing this so they could check for building codes. Obviously, army barracks don't have the same building codes. And it went on for several months before somebody in town government said, "Hey, I can't believe what's going on here." But I had several friends who lived there. We used to have great parties. And it just seemed, it was so neat. Wow, look at this little community. But when it became time to comply with building codes, he just had to close it. And then it became just part of the pastures. But for a few months there, it was quite a nice little community.
And that was just in this neighborhood?
That was, it's up here where Coachman is and Redcoat and one of those streets, Battle Flag. So, thanks for listening. I tend to talk an awful lot about this stuff.
No, this is great.
Members of my own family won't drive with me.
I've heard about this ride for many times. I've always wanted to take it with you. And I learned something new, like I'm sure everybody who takes this ride does.
If people have any questions, I hope that they'll reach out. I don't know very much about stuff, but I know a lot about Bedford.
Terrific. Well, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for thinking of this.
Okay.